Hi, I'm Kaja.
And I'm Joanna.
And this is Starlit Citadel Reviews.
Lords of Waterdeep is a Dungeons & Dragons themed worker placement game from Peter Lee and Rodney Thompson and Wizards of the Coast.
In Lords of Waterdeep, players are secret rulers of the city of Waterdeep, competing for victory points by completing quests and advancing their hidden agenda. It supports 2 to 5 players and lasts just over an hour. The expansion, Scoundrels of Skullport, adds 2 new locations with their own lords, buildings, and cards. It adds a 6th player and a new resource called Corruption.
Players begin Lords of Waterdeep by laying out the board, adventurer cubes, and gold tokens. Each player chooses a faction and collects the player mat and tokens in their color. Everyone places their marker on the scoring track and places an additional agent in the space next to the round track. The ambassador and lieutenant are placed next to the board.
The buildings, quest cards, and intrigue cards are shuffled and placed in face-down stacks on their spaces, and the top 3 building tiles are placed face-up in Builder's Hall. Each player is dealt a Lord card, which is kept hidden, and lists their secret objective. Each player gets 2 face-up quests and 2 face-down intrigue cards, and 4 face-up quests are placed at Cliffwatch Inn. 3 victory tokens are placed on each round space. The first player is chosen, and players are dealt starting gold according to the player order. Then the game begins.
At the start of each round, the victory tokens are removed from the current round space, and 1 is placed on each of the buildings remaining in Builder's Hall. Start of round effects are resolved on any buildings in play, and players begin taking their turns, one at a time, starting with the starting player.
On their turn, a player must place one of their agents on an unoccupied building space and resolve the action that building lists. Most of the basic buildings will allow you to collect gold or adventurer cubes in the quantity and type listed on their space. These are kept in your tavern.
Castle Waterdeep lets you take the first player token and draw 1 intrigue card. Builder's Hall lets you choose 1 face-up building, pay the cost in gold listed in its upper left, and add it to the board with one of your control markers attached to it. You immediately score any victory points from tokens on the building, resolve any when purchased effects, and draw a new building to fill the space in Builder's Hall.
Purchased buildings can have agents assigned to them to gain the listed action. If a player who is not a building's owner uses it, the owner immediately collects the owner benefit listed at the bottom of its tile. These buildings may let you collect or trade resources, collect cards or additional agents, and even use occupied spaces.
Cliffwatch Inn has 3 action spaces, each of which allows you to perform 1 action in addition to taking 1 quest card. The first 2 spaces let you collect gold or an intrigue card, while the third lets you discard and replace all of the face-up quests before choosing 1 to take. Whenever a quest card is taken from the inn, it is immediately replaced.
Waterdeep Harbor lets you play an intrigue card from your hand. These cards often target other players and may force them to lose or gain resources, or take on a mandatory quest. They may also grant you additional resources or actions. Any agents assigned to Waterdeep Harbor can be reassigned to another action space at the end of the round.
A player can also complete 1 quest on their turn by spending the resources that it requires and collecting the listed rewards. Completed quests are kept face down on your player mat, and quests of a particular type may score you additional points at the end of the game, depending on your Lord card.
Mandatory quests must be completed before any other quest. Plot quests provide ongoing bonuses in addition to their reward, and are kept face up next to your player mat after completion. These effects can provide powerful bonuses to collecting resources or taking actions.
So players take turns placing a single agent at a time and resolving quests until everyone has run out of agents. Then the agents at Waterdeep Harbor are reassigned in space order, players retrieve their agents from the board, and a new round begins.
The game ends after 8 rounds. Players earn additional victory points for adventurers and gold left in their tavern, and for fulfilling the conditions on their Lord card. The player with the most points wins.
So to me, Lords of Waterdeep is a great example of a game that set itself a fairly narrow focus or goal in its design and achieved that marvelously. Whatever you may think of the theme or the gameplay in general, whether or not it's the game for you, and for example, I'm not sure it's the game for me, you do have to be impressed with how incredibly well this game has managed to render itself accessible to people who might not otherwise play Eurogames like worker placements. The theme is obviously designed to draw in people who might not be so interested in farming or economic development right off the bat, but there's also so much more that makes this game accessible. It is incredibly easy to teach and learn. Not only is a rules explanation very quick to go through, there's not a ton of complexity or material there, but the interactions between the rules themselves are simple enough that players are going to master the basic rule set quite quickly. So you don't have to play a full game of this before you can understand it enough to develop strategy. You can start strategizing and responding tactically to your opponents pretty much right off the bat because you'll have internalized the rules in only a turn or two. Another really great aspect of this game's accessibility is the way in which it handles player interaction. Worker placements are kind of notorious for being low on interaction or being very limited in the kind of interaction they provide, and it's something that can turn off players who are used to more conflict-driven or interactive games, like, say, the entire role-playing and fantasy genre. And this game gives you two different kinds of interaction. The buildings give you that kind of soft interaction that Euros tend to do really well, where taking an action can benefit both you by giving you what the building has, but may also benefit another player, and you have to start weighing those slightly more subtle interactions. You've also got the intrigue cards, which give you really direct conflict. They're a kind of interaction that a lot of players are going to understand right off the bat. You do a thing and it directly affects another player. And the mandatory quests in particular can be a really nasty wrench to throw into somebody else's works, and can really give more conflict-driven players something to grab onto in a game that is otherwise a little bit more gentle and indirect with how players interact. Now, all of that accessibility does come at a bit of a price, and to me, that's depth of strategy. There is definitely strategy here. You have to respond tactically to your opponent's decisions. You have to build long-term plans around the Lord cards and the quests that you've gotten, but there's not a lot of variety in the kind of decision-making that's there. The basic mechanic of the game is you get stuff, and then you spend it to get more stuff, which is really most of the time just victory points. And it's not a system that lends itself to building engines. You don't find yourself in a very different position later in the game. You might have more stuff, but the way that you're approaching the strategy and the way that you're looking at things hasn't fundamentally shifted. So for people who are looking for more depth, who are looking for more development of strategy and of mechanics over the course of the game, Lords of Waterdeep may fall a little bit short.
So one thing that I was a little bit disappointed about in Lords of Waterdeep was the theme. Now, not that there isn't a theme, and not that the theme isn't great, because I am definitely a fan of fantasy. I love fantasy games, absolutely. But this game is coming from Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons & Dragons, and now Dungeons & Dragons has a vast world available to it of storytelling, of characters, of places, of this depth of story that they've just got this resource to draw on, which I don't feel like they've actually used very well here, which is a real shame because it's already there. So I'm disappointed that they didn't take more of that world and feed it into the quest cards and the board and just all of the story elements that could exist in this game. The actual flavor text that does exist on the quest cards in this game right now is mediocre, not particularly interesting. It doesn't engage me. I'm a Dungeons & Dragons player, and coming to this game, I was excited to be playing D&D in a different medium, in a board game format. And like Kaja was saying, in less of a conflict-driven way. It was kind of an interesting new way to play in this world. But I didn't really feel like the world was brought over all that well, so I was disappointed by that. That being said though, this game has a lot of strengths to it. Component-wise, if we don't look at the theme, the components are beautiful. The art is great, the color choice is really nice. It's a very attractive game, very pretty game to look at and play. Pieces are wooden, which is always nice. Everything's very robust. Also, even though that strategy is quite light and quite direct, there's an extra element of strategy and interest added by the Lord cards, which I really like. So this is adding a secret objective mechanic. And as far as I'm concerned, You can always make a game better by adding a secret objective mechanic, and that happens here. So you've got a game in which you sort of know what everybody's kind of doing. Everybody's completing quests and collecting resources, and every once in a while they're playing intrigue card on each other, but everybody's following the same path. But everybody's got a set of objectives that are just their own. You don't know what they are, you kind of have to try and figure it out as the game goes on, and that always adds an extra level of interest and strategy to this game. Also replayability, you never know what you're going to get next time. You might get a different lord and have to go after something slightly different. So generally, I think this game is, yes, incredibly accessible, fun to play. Don't expect too much depth in terms of strategy or theme, but if you go into it with that in mind, I think you'll really enjoy it.
Okay, seriously, where's the Mountain Dew?